In my previous video, I covered why PlayStation needs to diversify the types of exclusive games included in its library. While not 100% required watching material for this video, understanding some of the points I'll be bringing up in this one will be easier if you watch the previous video. A pinned comment with a link to that video will be included. Now, this video will cover why PlayStation needs to bring its over-the-top alien shooter back to modern hardware, and how it'd be the perfect transitional title so that it doesn't feel like Sony is only focused on cinematic story-based games. While Resistance wasn't the most cinematic of games in the PlayStation stable, it was still cinematic. The most cinematic games I can think of for the PS3 were Heavenly Sword and the Uncharted trilogy. Even Insomniac Games' kid-friendly title with Ratchet & Clank took on a more cinematic feel. In fact, I'd say the Ratchet games were more cinematic than even the Resistance series, as they felt like playing Pixar films. But that's beside the point. If you look at the cinematics for the Resistance trilogy, you'll notice the games had a high budget for the cutscenes. This made it feel like you were playing a cheesy 80s action film. And that was part of the appeal of the Resistance series. They were over the top and felt like they were homaging films the then current crop of Insomniacs were influenced by. If Insomniac were to revisit the Resistance franchise, they could utilize what they've learned from their work on the Spider-Man franchise and the newer Ratchet & Clank titles. Basically, the newer Insomniacs could homage the action flicks of the 1990s. The 90s are coming back, right?
Okay there, Boomer. Sorry, just wanted to roast you a little bit there. 90s would be fun to come back, but if we're bringing back the 90s, we're also bringing back the older, shittier games that we had back then. Proof and concept? Right there. This is a garbage game. And having that as a remake? Not sure that would be the best thing. But having a Resistance remake? Might be good. But in all honesty, having some of the 90s game come back? I wouldn't mind. Heck, I'm sure a lot of gamers wouldn't mind. But again, we're the older generation. I'm getting older, you're getting older, we're all getting older. Someday, we'll all be irrelevant. Later.
That point aside, with Resistance already being a little bit cinematic, Sony won't be alienating their core audience by bringing this series back. Hell, I think it has been long enough that fans of the franchise and the gaming public probably missed the games. The last mainline title came out almost 12 years ago, and it has been almost 11 since the last spin-off game released. Most would say it's been too long and the series is dead. However, if Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure can get localized on modern hardware after a decade, anything's possible. In all honesty, Resistance could come back and give Sony a proper first-person shooter in its lineup. That's actually a genre Sony lacks right now, at least in terms of exclusivity. The last reported sales figure for Killzone Shadowfall indicated the title had sold just over 2 million units as of 2014. Reasonable numbers, but not setting the world on fire for arguably the most popular genre of video games. It also seems like Sony has no desire to revisit the Killzone series at this time. One of the most popular genres at the moment is the Battle Royale game. Resistance actually has the building blocks to make an awesome Battle Royale title just off the setting alone. For those not in the know, Resistance is basically set in a post-apocalyptic world. When you break down what a Battle Royale is, there's actually survival gameplay elements. They're also always combining shooter gameplay elements. It doesn't matter if they're from a first or third person perspective, so Resistance already has 2 points going for it when it comes to transitioning to a Battle Royale game. When it comes to first person shooters, they live or they die by how deep their gameplay modes are and by the diversity of modes presented. Resistance has always had deep gameplay modes, and Resistance 2 was incredibly deep. It featured deathmatch, team deathmatch, co-op, and a plethora of others. This is part of why I stuck around with Resistance 2 for so long. If I wasn't feeling a given mode, I could jump around. It's actually why I was able to eventually gain the Killing Machine trophy for 10,000 kills in online multiplayer. I was not good at racking up kills in Resistance 2. I was more of an assist-based player, and I was happy to do that, as that was how I helped my team most of the time. However, if Insomniac did reboot Resistance or did a sequel, they would have to continue with the deep multiplayer content to be able to remain competitive in the current gaming landscape. This brings us to our next point. PlayStation lacks a multiplayer exclusive game at this point in time, thus coming back to diversifying the lineup. It's all well and good to have a stable full of single-player content, and I love Sony for this fact, but at this point in time, there isn't anything under the PlayStation Studios umbrella that fits the multiplayer mode. We know that Naughty Dog is supposedly working on the factions portion of The Last of Us Part 2, but that's yet to materialize, and well, just look at the player feedback on The Last of Us Part 2. It's a toxic cesspool, and it's very unlikely the vast majority of gamers will touch anything The Last of Us 2 related. So, what's Sony to do? Seems the perfect opportunity to slate in a new Resistance game, and if they want to really bring in the masses, they have an option for that. But what is that option, I hear you saying? Glad you asked. Sony could then separate the campaign of the game and the multiplayer. They could then implement a free-to-play model. That way, people who don't want to shell out $89.99 Canadian can just download the multiplayer experience off the PlayStation Network and get to playing against tons of people online. If you look at how a lot of multiplayer-centric games make their money these days, it's via battle passes and from people buying skins. While I'm not the biggest fan of microtransactions, I've come to accept they're just a fact of gaming in this day and age. And for the most part, they're pretty harmless. By splitting the two, Sony thus creates two revenue models for itself off of one IP. All in all, that'd be a pretty smart business decision. Think back to some of the games you've had the most fun with. Chances are they were probably pretty accessible, thus having a low skill floor, and they probably featured elements that were hard to master, meaning they had a high skill ceiling. These are the kinds of games that endure the test of time because they offer players of any skill level a high chance of running with someone else around the same skill level as them. Looking at the original Resistance trilogy, it definitely had that going for it. On any given night, especially in Team Deathmatch, you'd have a good mix of diehard gods at the game, some mid-level players like myself, and some scrub-level players as well, making it so that teams actually felt very evenly matched. There were very few instances where one team would get outright slaughtered by the other. If Insomniac or someone else under the PlayStation umbrella were to make this game, they could make that a selling point. These are just some of the reasons I think a remake or reboot of the Resistance franchise could do exceptionally well. But what are your thoughts on this? Comment below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to chat with me on my social media, links will be in the description. And until next time, keep blazing that trail.